Welcome back to another production walkthrough with me, Simon Shackleton, and today I'll be taking a look at my recently released track, Traumstaat. The general gist of the track. So let's just talk very briefly about the origins of the track, the thinking behind it and how it came about, and then we'll kind of break it down a little bit. We'll look at the strings and how they work in particular. We'll also then take a look at the piano and the pads together, and then how all of that kind of melds together to create this kind of very lush soundscape. We'll also take a brief look at the drums and just see how they're used to just sort of ramp up the intensity of this very kind of emotive track as the track progresses. And finally, we'll have a very, very quick look at the vocals, which actually on the version that recently came out on Anjuna Deep, there are no vocals. So I'm just going to start by talking to you a little bit about the thought processes behind the track. Traumstaat itself is German for dream state, and the track came about one morning. I woke up from a dream and I was really kind of fascinated by what happened in that split second between being asleep and in this vivid lucid dream state to being awake. And I know this is something that's very different, it's very personal for different people, but for me what tends to happen as I emerge from that dream state is my dream almost becomes a series of sort of particles, almost like a cloud. And as you reach for something that felt so real while you're in the midst of it, it just kind of dissipates. And the more that you grab at it, the less sense it makes, and the more these kind of particles of thought just disappear into the ether of the day. And so the concept of Traumstaat was really an exploration of that split second, that moment where you're feeling something. You still recall the essence of an experience, but you're going from that dream state, and daytime and the realities, the cold reality of day is kind of interfering at the end, and it's gone. And what actually happened on the morning that I had this dream, the dream is something to do with a shopping centre and a cassette tape and some other nonsense I can't fully remember. But what I did is I literally walked straight into the studio, turned the microphone on, and in my sleepy state, I just closed my eyes and I just tried to relate what the dream was all about. And so at the very beginning of this track, you can hear the speech, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this off the mastered version just so that you can kind of hear the full quality. And when we go into the track to break it down, we'll be going back to the kind of mixed down and pre-mastered version of the track. So at the very beginning,
when I try to remember, it's kind of hazy. I was just totally there. It's just times where it wasn't.
You can hear how the voices are panned. So they all have their space in the stereo spectrum. And the idea with this was that I related the story 5 or 6 times and then superimposed each of those impressions that I could recall on top of each other and gave them their own space within the stereo field. I know I said we'd talk about strings first, but actually while we're here we may as well just talk about these vocals. If we break these out and have a quick listen to them, these have now all been comped together because this is the mixdown stage. So these have all been kind of comped together into like a singular take. And if we go to about here and then just jack up the volume, you should be able to hear this a little bit better.
And then I reached out, I tried to, but it creates this construct around the fire, I guess, which is just belong in these constructs. And in every fibre of your being, you're there and your experience.
So I really like the texture that this adds to the track. It just adds this sort of dreamlike quality, and it goes to show as well that, you know, you don't have to be singing a big melody line or you know, doing anything that's kind of conventional with your voice. You can simply relay a story and tell the same story 5 times in a slightly different way, and that can be audio. That can be something that's useful for your track. It can be something inventive, something that doesn't come from a sample pack, that just comes from the heart, that just comes from your kind of creative muse. And just allowing yourself to do this kind of stuff, I think, is really important. You know, if I'd sat down with an audience of people and tried to do the same thing, and if I was very, you know, I would probably be very self-conscious of doing something like that. But these are the very precious creative moments in the studio where you need that space, or I certainly need that space away from other people, so I can just experiment and do so without judgment. The way that I use them is much more kind of after the event. It's much more scientific. So I had all of these parts kind of racked up here in Ableton, and my idea was, at the time I was tuning into Clubhouse a lot and listening to people kind of ramble on about NFTs and the state of the world and cryptocurrency and all of this stuff, and I was quite engaged in that world at the time. So I would typically get up, put Clubhouse on when I was walking downstairs to get a cup of coffee, and that was almost the first thing that I heard during the day. And actually, this is one of the last times I actually used the app, funnily enough, because it occurred to me when I was listening to this back and actually creating the track that you can see here. I'm just going to take, that was -6, wasn't it? So this back end of the track here, what happens is I recorded just down the microphone that I have here. I just recorded a whole bunch of Clubhouse channels, and I did them individually, and then I used the same technique to overlay them on top of each other, gave them their room inside the stereo field, and this is how that sounded. What I think's really cool about this is you can just pick out the odd word, the odd conversation, and as you get to the very end of this track, those words just, what I did is I took some of the channels down in volume, and at the very end there are just 1 or 2 channels that are left, so you can pick out the words a bit more clearly. But it's a really simple technique, but it was something I really enjoyed doing. It was thinking outside of the box slightly, and it created this really nice kind of dreamscape. The concept of it was very much based around the beginning of the song is the dream state, and it's me trying to kind of come into the world during the, you know, during my waking hours. I've just woken up and I'm listening, I'm trying to relay this story, and then the Clubhouse is the world itself, just sort of turning my dream into just particles of nothingness, and it's just disappeared into the day. So that is the concept behind these vocal parts. The way the track works as well, as you can see from this master, is that it starts very gradually and very slowly unfolds. So in the early parts we don't hear any strings, we just hear this resonant kind of pulsing around, and then the drums just kind of coming in and bringing a little bit of energy into the track. And at the same time, the voices are just folding away into the fabric of the tune. And the pads are coming up now, a bit of warmth there. Now I have another video on my YouTube channel where I look at the genesis of Traumstaat, and that might be a video that now would be a good time to check out, because this tune actually went through 4 completely different variations, or 2 primary variations, before it sort of settled on this finished version. I think it's quite interesting looking back over tracks and seeing how your process of refinements worked. And for me, a big part of that is understanding what the core of the track is trying to tell me, what the essence of the track is. And when I first created it, I was really interested in this idea of quite a wall of sound, quite an intense kind of wall of sound, almost like I would have made during some of my older Elite Force tracks, where I have multiple layers all coming on top of each other, and quite aggressive, actually, quite sort of edgy. And then I realised over time that actually the essence of this track is not that at all. And what I felt was happening was that actually those aggressive drums and all those layers were too demanding on the ear, when actually the essence of the track lies in this area here. This is a very emotive piece of electronica, and it's really all about these strings, pads and piano and how they all interrelate. So as we go through the gears here, this is where the first sort of violin part comes in. And this is really the main part of your listener journey by this stage. First of all, you've got your beats, and so you've got used to the vibe and the feel of the track. Then when you get here, you have this lyrical violin sample. It's not a sample, but this lyrical violin part coming in. And even though the rhythms are there and they're quite prominent, and they're, we'll talk about those later on, but they're obviously doing their thing. As far as the attention goes, you're really just focusing on the lyrical string line. So these strings, as the track progresses, it feels to me like they become really dense and really complex. But if you actually look at what the strings are doing, you can see that they're really, really simple lines. And I'm just going to solo the string parts a little bit later in the track, so we'll play it from here. And then in this play out section, so you can see the strings have the feeling, they give you the impression of being very, very rich and very kind of dense when you listen to the track as a whole. And if we listen to this particular section that we were just playing, really feels like there's a lot more going on in the strings than that. But what I've actually done on this track is I've used a whole bunch of other parts to create that kind of chordal movement that almost acts like it's a sort of supporting role really to these strings, because the strings are the thing that the ear is actually following. But in these pads we have very simple as you can see here, there's not an awful lot going on here, but it's actually doing a lot of work to support these kind of single note string parts. So these chords are actually really sort of emotive and really quite lush. Let's jack it up a bit so you can hear it better. And then those chords are being partially replicated as well by what's happening here in the piano part, this felt piano. but the piano is in a very different kind of register, so it's a much sort of higher chords, but again super simple. So the movement itself's all coming from that kind of internal dialogue that the strings are having. Now if we listen to all three parts together here, I think what's quite interesting to me here as well is that the real drama that's happening here is in the shifts that are occurring down below in the bass parts. So if we add those bass parts in here and give that another play, change. And at that point, when you bring in the bass, the way that the bass kind of works almost as a sort of musical counterpoint to what's happening in the string parts, that's when that real sort of sense of emotion, I think, gets generated. So this particular track it's quite complex, the way that these kind of chordal parts and the string lead lines interplay with one another. The chords are not sort of straightforward and that simple, but that's what gives them that sort of heart-wrenching emotive quality. And the basses themselves, the way that they step down and then step up in combination, I think that's what kind of works very effectively in this as a sort of harmonic progression. If we just go back to the strings very briefly and just have a look at them again, one of the things to note with strings is that if you look at some of the kind of like classical string parts going way back to Johann Sebastian Bach and Handel and Haydn, etc. Back then they had very strict rules of things that you could and couldn't do. Actually, it was all very technical, the music back then. And one of the things that you're taught in orchestration is that contrary motion, that means one part going in the opposite direction to the other part, is a really sort of strong way of creating string parts that don't only move as a unit, but they kind of have this internal movement within them, and that tends to somehow strengthen them, as opposed to you scoring string parts purely as like octaves of the same thing going up and down and following the same melody. And that also goes for rhythm. So if you look at the internal parts here, you can see that these notes are kind of moving at different times. So you have this lead violin, and then the second violin here. If we play these both together, they're kind of moving at different times, and at certain points as well, they're moving in different directions. Now, I didn't do this in a very sort of purist contrary motion way, but you can see that by just having this kind of internal movement where one string part is doing something different than the others, it creates a kind of sense of sort of realism, because these are all just plugins, these aren't real violins, and it makes it really feel genuinely like a string quartet, or as a series of string parts would play. And if we just listen to them together. Contrary motion there. So, when you're making string parts as well, if you're looking for them to be realistic, and I know that not all the time people are, those are the kinds of things that you're looking for. You're also looking for in the velocity, and you can see that here down below the bottom of this page, you can see that actually the velocities are very consistent here, because I found that if you added some randomization into the velocities as you would with a real player, the notes were just kind of getting lost because there's such a sort of wall of sound. There's loads of other stuff going on in this track. So in order to keep that consistency, I put all of the velocities at 127. And then what you can do with string parts on almost every good quality string library is you can play around with the expression within the library. And I think if I just unfreeze this track for a minute, hopefully there's some of that going on behind the scenes. If not, then my bad. But yeah, if you go into your this little dialogue behind the scenes here, you can see that there's a modulation wheel and there is an expression controller. Now the expression controller and the mod wheel, it depends on the library. They both tend to do different things. But what's happening here, you can see there's a lot of detail that's gone in here to the expression wheel. The lower the levels are here, the smoother the attack. And as far as the modulation wheel goes, this basically allows you to add vibrato, so the kind of wobbly tone that you hear to a violin, which is very sort of naturalistic, and every decent violinist will be adding vibrato. It gives it that sort of human characteristic. Now Ableton actually makes it relatively easy to do this, and you can see that effectively what I've done here over time is I've copied the same. I've created one pattern, and then I've copied that pattern over 8-bar phrases. And one of the little tricks that you can do to take that entire section and make it a little bit more kind of dynamic and a little bit more interesting. So we've selected the entire selection. Rather than having to go into each part and make changes, I could see this little square at the top here. If I just click on that and bring it down, you can see that it takes everything and proportionately changes the levels. So you can actually create this really lovely sort of organic curve where the intensity of the vibrato kind of grows throughout the track. And I really like the fact that you can do that in Ableton. I think it's a really sort of effective device that came in one of the recent iterations of the program. So that's really our track. Let's just talk very briefly about the drums and see what the drums are doing. Now, if you were to hear these drums, well, in fact, listening to this track, I wonder what tempo you would place it at. Let's just listen to the drums on their own for a short while from bar 113. Now, I kind of feel with this track, one of the things I was trying for with the drums is almost creating a drum part where the lines were really blurred in between something that was half tempo and full speed. Now, full speed, if we look at the tempo here, is 130 beats per minute. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's running at 130 beats per minute, but it also doesn't feel like it's running at half of that, which would be 65 beats per minute. It feels like it's somewhere in the middle, and I really wanted to play with that sort of push and pull of the rhythms, which is something that I did by using, and the rhythms are typically complex, as you can see. There's lots of different parts here, but I wanted to do something that really played with the push and pull of these effects. And if we go towards the end of this track and just give it another listen, you'll see down here in our effects returns that there's all kinds of detailed work going on in the effects. And actually what happens over time is more and more intensity is being brought to play from these effects. So this is something that's happening quite subliminally. It's happening behind the scenes. You can see that just in terms of arrangement, there are certain sounds here, like this kind of very simple tambourine sound that doesn't come in until the back end of the track. But really a lot of the interest and energy and kind of intrigue and almost that sense that they're being played live, or they're being at least mixed live on an old school mixing desk. Now that's been created by, let's have a look, see if we've got some automation that I can show you here. So for example, this tight loop, which forms the kind of backbone of the track. You can see here on the automation, what this automation's doing is it's sending little spikes of information to the effects units and just affecting them over very short periods of time. So what I'm doing throughout the course of this drum part is just picking out the odd hit here and there. And you can see as the track goes on, the number of hits that I'm picking out are increasing. Now, this particular effects return is going to this big reverb. But then we also have, here we have let's have a look, this will be a delay most likely of some sort. Yeah, this is an echo. So this echo, you can see that each 8-bar phrase, I'm ramping up the echo, and ramping up the echo, and then dropping it back, cutting it right back to, minus 50 dB, so that's almost inaudible. And I'm doing that every 8 bars, so it's just giving you this kind of organic flow that's keeping the rhythms interesting without me having to bring in everything, including the kitchen sink, to continue to create some interest. And that's something that I feel really strongly about with this kind of music, is a lot of the time less is more. These effects can work extremely hard for you if you're patient enough to do the programming to really kind of make them work. And we look down here, we have another drum delay, and this one is, let's see, this one is more of a kind of skittering kind of like dub delay, and this is being modulated by an LFO. And you're not going to be able to hear that all that clearly because it's a very sort of subtle effect, and at different parts in the track that's going to be kind of ramped up, I would guess, probably towards the end here. Just about hear that. Let's just jack it up a touch. You can hear there that there's this sort of really glitchy, slightly out of control, sort of slightly out of tempo as well, sort of echo effect. And then at the bottom here we have this this timeless echo from Fab Filter. Let's see what this is doing. So here the tambourines, again just towards the end of 4-bar phrases here, the tambourines are just being given a little bit of spike, a little bit of a push, just to bleed over into the next section, so that things aren't ever too regimented. That's another reason why I tend to do this a lot with 8-bar loops. We deal here in Ableton with something which can be very, very regimented. It can be very based around, this is your grid, you must not deviate from the grid at any cost. And I love to deviate from the grid because ultimately this is a piece of music and I want it to feel like that. I want it to feel warm and organic. I want it to have some flow to it. And that's why I'll often put in these little fills or these ramps like this just at the end of an 8-bar phrase, because it just blends over into the beginning of the next phrase and just creates a sort of humanizing effect to the way the track kind of feels and the way it's not too regimented. So I think I've covered everything that I wanted to talk about today. I hope you've enjoyed this production walkthrough. If you have, then I'd recommend maybe checking out my other series that I just recently started called Decoded. And in Decoded, it's really an adventure in critical listening. So I'll talk about tracks in this kind of detail, but they're not my tracks. They're usually pretty well-known tunes, and I recently did Glue by Bicep. And I'm just working off a master of the finished track and just trying to kind of get to the bottom of what it is that makes the track so successful. So if you want to check that out, I'll put a link down below to Decoded. And also, if you want to check out any more of my production walkthroughs, then again, link down below in the description. So if you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also check out my mixing, mastering, mentoring channel. I also have a website at simonshackleton.org, which has all of my kind of artist music, and then mixingmasteringmentoring.com, where I offer one-to-one mentoring sessions as well as mixing and mastering services. And I am just going to do the right thing here and play you out with the last kind of section of this track. So thanks again for listening. Really appreciate your support. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss another video. See you next time.